Rain fell in steady sheets, soaking the streets and everything left behind. Near a flickering streetlight, a small cardboard box sagged under the weight of water. Inside, a faint movement stirred. A tiny puppy, barely old enough to stand, shivered against the cold, its fur clinging to fragile bones. Each passing car sent waves of water splashing over the box, pushing it closer to the curb. The puppy whimpered softly, too weak to cry out louder. Hours passed as the storm refused to let up. Then, footsteps approached, hesitant at first, then quickening. A pair of hands lifted the soaked box from the ground. Warmth replaced the cold, and the trembling eased just slightly. For the first time since being left behind, the puppy was no longer alone, and the storm no longer felt endless. The moving truck rumbled down the road, carrying away everything familiar. Behind it, a dog ran with relentless determination, paws pounding against the pavement. Mile after mile, it followed the scent, the sound, the memory of home. Cars passed, horns blared, but nothing broke its focus. The distance grew longer, the truck smaller. Exhaustion crept in slowly. Then, all at once, the dog's pace faltered, legs trembling beneath its weight. Finally, it stopped. The road stretched empty ahead, the truck long gone. Confusion settled in where purpose once burned. The dog stood still, scanning the horizon, waiting for something that would never return. As the sun dipped low, it turned around, each step heavier than the last, carrying not just fatigue, but the quiet realization that home had left without it. The park bustled with life, laughter drifting through the air as people passed by without noticing. Tied to a bench sat a small puppy, its leash looped tightly around cold metal. A half-eaten sandwich lay nearby, already drying at the edges. The puppy watched every face, tail wagging weakly at each passing figure, hope flickering with every glance. As hours passed, the crowd thinned. The sun sank lower, shadows stretching across the empty pathways. The puppy curled closer to the bench, hunger and confusion settling in. The leash kept it anchored, even as fear crept closer. Then footsteps approached slowly, stopping just within reach. Hands untied the knot that had held it captive. The puppy hesitated, then leaned forward. The bench remained, but the waiting was finally over. The apartment hallway smelled of fresh paint and unfamiliar footsteps. Doors opened and closed, lives moving forward behind them. Outside one door, a small cat sat motionless beside a neatly placed carrier. A sign hung above, "No pets allowed." The cat blinked slowly, ears twitching at every passing sound. It stayed close to the door, as if waiting for it to open again. Hours turned into a day, and the hallway grew quieter. The food bowl beside the carrier remained untouched, the water slowly evaporating. Footsteps passed, some slowing, most continuing on. The cat didn't move far, only shifting slightly, still facing the door. Then one evening, a different set of footsteps paused. The carrier was gently lifted, the silence broken by something new. The hallway returned to its emptiness, but the cat no longer remained behind. The shelter was loud with echoes of barking and movement, but one kennel remained unusually quiet. Inside sat a dog with tired eyes and a still posture. Clipped to the cage was a folded note, edges worn and slightly crumpled. A worker paused, unfolding it carefully. The words spoke of love and loss, of circumstances too heavy to carry. The dog watched silently, as if it understood every word written. Days passed, and the kennel filled with others, each with their own story. But Bruno remained still, waiting without expectation. Then, one afternoon, a visitor stopped longer than most. The note was read again, slower this time. A decision followed. The kennel door opened, and Bruno stepped forward, leaving behind the weight of the past, carrying only the quiet chance of something new. The hum of vacuums echoed through the empty car wash as night settled in. Near one of the stations, a dog sat quietly, eyes fixed on the entrance. Cars came and went during the day, but by night, silence took over. Still, the dog stayed. Dust clung to its fur, and hunger slowly hollowed its strength, yet it refused to leave. Every engine sound made its ears perk. Every set of footsteps stirred a fragile hope. The ground beneath it grew colder with each passing hour, but it remained anchored by memory. On the second day, its body weakened, its stance unsteady. Then, a car pulled in, slower than the rest. A door opened. Gentle steps approached. This time, the dog didn't just look up, it leaned forward, as if recognizing something it had been waiting for all along. The dumpster stood unnoticed behind the alley, surrounded by the usual clutter of forgotten things. Inside, a small shoebox shifted slightly beneath the pile. Its lid was taped shut, trapping the darkness inside. Within that confined space, a tiny kitten struggled, its breath shallow, its movements weak. The air grew thin, the silence heavy. Time blurred as the world outside carried on without knowing. Then, a sudden crash, trash bags shifting, footsteps approaching. The lid lifted, light spilling into the darkness for the first time. The kitten barely moved, its strength nearly gone. Hands reached in carefully, lifting it out of the box that had nearly become its end. Wrapped in warmth, the kitten's tiny chest rose a little steadier. What had been discarded was no longer invisible. The alley faded behind as something new began. The clinic stood quiet under the dim glow of streetlights, its doors closed to the world for the night. Outside, near the entrance, an old dog lay curled against the cold pavement. Its cloudy eyes scanned nothing, seeing only shadows. Time passed unnoticed as the night deepened. The dog didn't wander, it couldn't. Instead, it waited, guided by instinct more than sight. A faint tremor ran through its body as the cold settled deeper into its bones. Hours later, the soft sound of keys broke the silence. A door unlocked, light spilling outward. Footsteps paused at the entrance. The dog shifted slightly, sensing presence more than seeing it. Warm hands soon followed, lifting gently, carefully. The pavement was left behind as the dog was carried inside, away from the darkness, into a place where waiting finally came to an end. The house was nearly empty, stripped of everything that once made it feel alive. Dust floated in the quiet air as sunlight filtered through bare windows. Inside, a dog sat by one of them, still and watchful. Outside, a car pulled away, growing smaller with each passing second. The dog's gaze remained fixed, unblinking, as if willing the scene to reverse. The silence inside grew heavier, echoing against empty walls. Time stretched slowly, marked only by shifting light. Hunger crept in, followed by thirst, but the dog barely moved. The window held its attention, the last place where everything familiar had disappeared. Then, footsteps approached the front door, different, unfamiliar. The door opened with a creak, breaking the stillness. The dog turned its head for the first time, leaving the window behind as something new stepped into the empty space. Cars sped past in a blur of noise and wind, the off-ramp buzzing with constant motion. Just beyond the guardrail sat a small cage, barely visible against the gravel. Inside, a rabbit pressed itself into the corner, trembling at every passing vibration. The sun beat down relentlessly, drying the ground and draining what little strength remained. Hours passed, then more, the world rushing by without pause. The cage offered no escape, only exposure. As evening approached, the noise softened slightly, but the fear remained. Then, footsteps crunched against gravel nearby. The rabbit froze, ears twitching. The cage door opened slowly, carefully. Gentle hands lifted it out, shielding it from the chaos it had been left in. The road continued to roar in the distance, but the rabbit was no longer part of it. The abandoned factory stood silent, its broken windows letting in streaks of fading light. Inside, among rusted machines and scattered debris, a mother dog lay curled around her puppies, their small bodies pressed close, seeking warmth and safety in a place that offered little of either. Hunger gnawed at her, but she stayed still, conserving what strength remained. The puppies whimpered softly, their tiny movements growing weaker with each passing hour. Days blurred together in the dim shadows. Then, a distant sound, footsteps echoing through the hollow space. The mother's ears lifted, alert despite exhaustion. Light grew stronger as someone moved closer. The stillness broke as the family was finally seen. Hands reached down, not to harm, but to help. One by one, they were lifted from the shadows, leaving behind the cold emptiness of the factory. The sign had fallen, its bold letters now hidden in the mud. Around it, the ground was wet from recent rain, puddles reflecting the gray sky. A small puppy sat nearby, soaked and still. The others were gone, taken earlier, leaving only this one behind. It shifted slightly, paws sinking into the soft ground. Each passing car slowed for a moment, then moved on. The puppy didn't follow. It simply watched, waiting without understanding. The cold seeped in as the day wore on, its energy fading. Then a car stopped again, this time longer. A door opened, footsteps approaching carefully. The puppy lifted its head, just barely. Arms reached down, lifting it from the puddle. The fallen sign remained where it was, but the puppy was no longer part of what had been left behind. The house stood empty, stripped of furniture and life. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, illuminating a single cage left in the corner. Inside, a parrot perched quietly, its reflection the only company it had. Days passed in silence, broken only by faint echoes from outside. The bird shifted occasionally, watching its own movements in the mirror, repeating the same small motions. Food was scarce, water nearly gone. The stillness grew heavier with time. Then, one afternoon, the door creaked open. Light flooded in, footsteps echoing across the bare floor. The parrot turned its head, alert for the first time in days. The cage door opened gently, and the bird was lifted out, away from the empty space. The mirror remained behind, but the loneliness did not follow. The car sped down the road, its tires cutting through fresh snow. In a sudden motion, something small was thrown from the window, landing in a soft but freezing drift. The car disappeared without slowing. Buried partially in snow, a cat struggled to move, its body stiff from shock and cold. The wind picked up, covering its tracks, making it nearly invisible against the white landscape. Minutes stretched into something longer, colder. Then, distant footsteps approached, crunching through the snow. A figure paused, noticing something out of place. The cat was uncovered carefully, lifted from the freezing ground. Wrapped in warmth, its trembling began to slow. The road remained cold and empty, but the cat was no longer part of it. The shelter lights dimmed as closing time approached, casting long shadows across the rows of kennels. One held a senior dog lying quietly, its movements slow, its eyes tired. A small tag hung on the door, marking time in a way the dog couldn't understand. The hours passed with little change, footsteps coming and going, none stopping for long. The dog remained still, conserving what little energy it had left. Then, near the end of the day, someone paused. They stood there longer, watching, considering. The kennel door opened with a soft click. The dog lifted its head slightly, uncertain. Gentle hands guided it forward, away from the space that had been counting down its time. The shelter remained behind, but the final hours never came. Outside the pet store, a small cardboard box sat unnoticed among passing feet. Inside, a ferret shifted restlessly, its movements confined by the narrow space. The world outside buzzed with activity, but no one stopped long enough to see. The box rocked slightly with each movement, then settled again. Hours passed, the noise rising and falling around it. Then, a shadow paused nearby. The box was lifted, curiosity replacing indifference. The lid opened, revealing the small creature inside. The ferret blinked in the sudden light, its energy flickering back. It was no longer hidden, no longer overlooked. The busy sidewalk continued as before, but the box was carried away, no longer part of what had been ignored. The field stretched wide and empty, its grass brittle and dry under the harsh sun. In the center stood a horse, ribs faintly visible beneath its coat. It moved slowly, each step deliberate, searching for something no longer there. The water trough sat empty, dust collecting at the bottom. Days passed without change, the sun rising and falling without relief. The horse's movements grew slower, its strength fading. Then one morning, a distant engine broke the silence. A truck approached, stopping near the fence. Figures stepped out, moving quickly. Water followed first, then gentle hands. The horse lifted its head slightly, sensing the shift. The field remained dry, but it was no longer alone within it. The sidewalk buzzed with movement, footsteps passing in every direction. Near the edge, a small plastic tub sat unattended. Inside, a turtle remained still, its shell marked by faint scratches. Curious hands occasionally tapped the container, causing brief moments of movement before stillness returned. The sun beat down, heating the plastic, making the confined space uncomfortable. Time stretched slowly as the crowd continued to flow. Then, someone stopped, not out of curiosity, but concern. The tub was lifted, carried away from the noise and heat. The turtle shifted slightly, its world changing once again. The busy sidewalk remained behind, but the stillness it had been trapped in did not. Rainwater rushed along the curb, carrying leaves and debris through narrow channels. Among it, a small plastic ball rolled aimlessly, bumping against the edges. Inside, a hamster spun weakly, its energy nearly gone. The ball caught briefly on a piece of debris, then continued drifting with the current. The world outside blurred with motion and noise. Then, a hand reached down, stopping the ball before it disappeared into the drain. The movement ceased instantly. The hamster slowed, its tiny body finally at rest. The ball was opened carefully, releasing it from the confined space. The rushing water continued on, but the hamster was no longer part of its path. Thunder cracked across the sky as rain poured down in heavy sheets. Tied to a fire hydrant, a dog huddled close, its body trembling with each flash of lightning. The leash held firm, leaving no room to escape the storm. Water pooled around its paws, soaking its fur completely. Each thunderclap made it flinch, yet it stayed in place, unable to go anywhere else. Time stretched with every second of the storm. Then, through the rain, footsteps approached. A figure moved closer, unbothered by the downpour. The leash was untied, freeing what had been held in place. The dog hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. The storm still raged, but it no longer faced it alone.